A number of you have. That's on numerous farm radio stations in Kansas, 193 stations from coast to coast, plus Sirius XM multiple times a day. So about 100 times a month, you're 146 channel, Arizona Rural Radio. But I've been on WIBW every other Monday for 27, 28 years. I think I've just eclipsed pretty close to 800 programs with them. And then every other Wednesday on KFRN, many of them probably for that. That's been 27, 28 years. I do travel the country, coast to coast. I am, this is not a one out and back. I'm speaking all day tomorrow in Hayes for attorneys and CPAs at the Western Kansas Council on Giving and Estate Planning. So that meeting is all day tomorrow in Hayes, and then back home for a few days, and then off to Durango, Colorado for 2 days, speaking all day long. So that's a 16-hour. You get about 45 minutes tonight, like 16 hours of technical stuff. Come to Durango, and then off to Kennewick, Washington, and then back to Denver, and out to Montana, to North Dakota, and then we'll get to about mid-August. That. So I'm always pretty much on the go. Meantime, when you see the blog writings and so forth, I may be in a hotel someplace, I may be at home, across the country someplace writing those. And here's the address for that. If you're not familiar with that, that's my web address, washburnlaw.edu/Walter, WALTR. It stands for the Washburn Agricultural Law and Tax Report. And on the home page, down the left-hand side, is where you can find the link to my blog on the Law Professors Blog Network, called the Agricultural Law and Taxation Blog. And if you're into Twitter, this crowd may not be a Twitter crowd, not sure. But there's my Twitter handle, and if you're on Facebook, that's the name that you want to look for Facebook. Either my personal name or that. It's both the same. I use Facebook and Twitter purely for educational information to get that out. I'm not posting pictures of what I had for supper. I have a niece that did that, and we're no longer friends on Facebook. Probably because of some snipey comments that I make. And I thought she didn't take kindly to agricultural connotations to what her food looked like. Kind of get my drift. What my comments. I've seen those before. It's not served on a plate. Amazing how fast, how sensitive people can be, even family. But anyway. So washburnlaw.edu/Walter. There's my email address. Feel free to contact me anytime you have questions. I try to get them answered as soon as I can, especially during tax season. I get backed up with easily 100 a day questions. So my wife is here with me this evening. She drove me out, and she can tell you we do not have much depth of conversation or any conversation when she's driving me out, because I'm writing something or answering emails or researching something or getting ready for the next event. And tonight I've got to sort my slides together for the 8-hour presentation tomorrow. They're all there. I just have to review. So that's probably not tonight, but early in the morning. But nevertheless, and I find this interesting because there was something in the news just this evening on the way from the hotel in Hayes to here that's pertinent to our discussion tonight. Something the administration is trying to do today in terms of an announcement that they made that dovetails right in with what I'm going to talk about tonight. Now, the normal way that legislation is made, if you want to think back into the 1970s, I think everybody here can remember the 1970s. You remember that program on Saturday morning, Schoolhouse Rock? Remember the educational show that was there in between cartoons as to how a bill was made? You remember that? Now, there's a great attempt to try to not do that approach these days. And that's what happened again today. The administration made an announcement. Well, forget Senator Manchin. Too bad we can't get a bill through Congress. I'm just going to do an executive order. We're going to ram the stuff through. Never mind what the U.S. Supreme Court said about 3 weeks ago. I'm going to talk about it. They're doing trying to do an end run around what the Supreme Court said, and they basically said one of the senators said today, well, we're just going to ram all this stuff through. If the court knocks one or two of them out, we'll still get something through. Wait, that's not the way the system is supposed to be. So what's going on? What's been going on? What's under the surface? That's what I want to kind of peel back this evening and show you. And everything I'm talking about tonight's on my website. I've written about it, put it out there, I've published it. And so I want to start out by talking about the public trust doctrine. Probably not something that you've ever seen unless you're really digging into this stuff. But this is the legal theory that's out there that they're using. Some activists are using, law professors are using. I have a colleague at the law school that is deeply enmeshed in this and filing amicus briefs in various cases. I'm on the other side in some of those same cases, which makes it pretty interesting. He has not won any of those. I have. So I did him. I said, I sure hope you don't get paid for the advice you give because you're not prevailing on it. It's just go back out on the road. But the public trust doctrine, what is it? Well, it's actually nothing new. It's just wrapped in a new blanket. It's a centuries-old theory predating the Magna Carta, which was one of our founding documents, one of the documents behind our founding. But the doctrine says that the seas, the ocean, were viewed as the common property of everyone, and so they were not subject to private use and ownership. So they were deemed to be held in public trust for the use of the public. Okay, that's the basis for it. So the seas didn't belong to anyone. You can't possess them. You can't have a deed to them. You can't treat them as your private property. They're to be used for commerce by everyone. Okay, that's the ancient doctrine that's out there. That's where the public trust lingo came from. So it's many centuries old. That concept was later adopted by the drafters of the Magna Carta, which again was one of the documents that founded this country. And it became part of the common law of the colonies and then the initial 13 states after the Revolution. So what does that mean? Well, certain things belong to the public at large and private. Well, that primarily applied in the United States to the country was formed with access to seashore and intertidal waters. That's what it was limited to. We have to have the public to have access to the waters to put a boat out there so that you can put a fishing boat out there and harvest fish or do whatever in the sea. So you have to have access to the seashore and intertidal water. Seems pretty innocent. That was the initial view as to the scope of the public trust doctrine. Now, the issue now is they're trying to use that theory and expand it to get access to private property, to take private property rights, and do an end run around the Fifth Amendment of the U.S. Constitution, which is the takings clause, which says that the government can take your property if they want to, but they have to do what? They have to pay you for it. Well, if we have a way around that, then they can take your property without paying for it. Keep that thought in mind. So any expansion, whether it's by courts or whether it's by Congress or whether it's by a state legislature, results in curtailing or stopping, pulling back vested private property. What's a vested private property? It's a right that's been there, that you've had for some time. The law has recognized that. Some of you may have in Kansas what's known as a vested water right. Okay? There's no question that that's your right, that's your private property. It belongs to you with respect to that land. That's a big issue. This whole thing is a big issue for agriculture because if we're curtailing vested property rights with respect to agriculture, that's land, that's water, that's air, that's minerals, anything that you can privately own. And a lot of those are major resources with respect to agricultural operations. You need those resources privately owned to be able to convey them, to operate efficiently. Okay, The first application of this public trust doctrine by the U.S. Supreme Court was in 1842 with Martin versus Lessee of Waddell. And the question was, well, who owns the land underneath that is submerged off the coast of New Jersey? And that was a question that came up because oyster fishermen were concerned about it. Well, who has the rights to fish the beds of the coast off of New Jersey? The land at issue, the court said, belonged to the state of New Jersey for the benefit of the state. And so the state could license people to go out there and fish. They could regulate that somehow. But that was deemed, under the public trust doctrine, that the ocean, the off the coast of New Jersey, was deemed to be owned by the public at large, so by the state on behalf of the public, and that it could be used as regulated by the state. That was in 1842. Illinois Central Railroad case, 50 years later, back in the Supreme Court, the Supreme Court again said, government cannot interfere with public rights to access land under navigable waters. Now, note the distinction here. Under navigable waters, if it's non-navigable waters, that's private property. You own the beds of that as the overlying landowner. But if it's navigable waters, then the bed is owned by the public. We got some case law on that in Kansas. There was a case about 30 years ago in southeast Kansas, down near Pittsburgh, where you had a farmer that owned both sides of Shoal Creek, owned the land on both sides, frequent through his property. He didn't like canoeists coming right through the middle of his farm, so he fenced it and ran a fence across there to stop the canoeists. And somebody came down in the middle of the night, caught themselves in the fence. Of course, too bad. He owns both sides. The fence across because he owns the bed of a non-navigable stream. Now, you can't do that across the Mississippi. You can't do that across the Missouri. It's navigable water. In Kansas, the Kansas River is navigable water. But the stream is going through your property, run a fence across. Same theory is going on here. Except, the court said, for situations where the land involved would interfere with the public's ability to access the water or impair navigation. So again, it was just very constrained doctrine, only applied to access to water. Other applications of this, however, would be preservation of oil and mineral resources, preservation of fish stocks, crustacean beds. Many lakes and navigable streams are maintained under the public trust doctrine for purposes of drinking water and recreation. Okay. And that historically has been the limitation of the public use doctrine. For drinking water supplies, for recreation on navigable streams, and if it's a coastal water, that's deemed to be owned under the public trust doctrine by the state that is the adjoining state to that water, so that they can regulate the use of that for private purposes. Okay. Now, when we talk about the Fifth Amendment, because any expansion of this doctrine is going to chip away at private property rights, then we have to think about the Fifth Amendment. The Fifth Amendment says the government can take your property, but they have to pay for it. They have to pay you just compensation. Takings clause of the Fifth Amendment. That's a fundamental constitutional right because it's one of the first 10 amendments to the Constitution. And so any law that Congress passes or a state passes that infringes on a fundamental constitutional right is looked at pretty closely. That's subject to what we call strict scrutiny. It's a very high hurdle that the state or the federal government has to overcome to be able to have that law be deemed to be constitutional. Okay, so that deals with ownership of private property. So private property ownership is a fundamental constitutional right under the Fifth Amendment. Subject to any law that impinges upon private property is subject to strict scrutiny, meaning it's going to be pretty tough for the government to say we've got a reason we need to take this property and not have to pay for it. But they do have the eminent domain power. They can take it, but they have to pay for it. A lot of the battles on Fifth Amendment take place in level compensation. Okay. Now, the proponents that for the expansion of the public trust doctrine, really what they're doing here is they're trying to do an end run around the just compensation clause of the Fifth Amendment. And this is the key to understand this. I'll break it down as simply as I possibly can here. And this is the frustrating, this is, by the way, the frustrating thing for my research assistant. I have law students that do research for me, and I'll have them write up a case or research an issue. You got to boil that down, way down. I get this stuff. Forget everything they taught you in first year of research and writing. I don't want that stuff. And I had one student, one of my research assistants about a month ago, she just started for me. And I get this 2.5-page summary of a case. And so I reworked the whole thing. And I put it in a script for my 2-minute daily radio show, which is actually 82. I have 82.5 seconds from start to finish to talk about what she wrote. It took her 1,500 words. And I said, okay, here's what you gave me in 256 words. When you read a case, I want you to, what you're trying to do is tell a story. What is this case about? Why is it relevant? And remember this when you get out there and you have clients. They don't care about all this flowery stuff. Tell them how it affects them and why they should care about it. So they're learning. And one of my other students went with me to Columbia, Missouri last month, where I was speaking. Just had a year of law school. I think I last hours. Here. Get to the point and move on. So here's the key point on this. If the government has to pay for what they're taking, is there a way to get around that requirement? And this is where they're using the public trust doctrine. Because what they're saying is, the theory is that public rights pre-existed any private property right. So the public rights pre-existed, and private property rights are automatically subject to the pre-existing public rights under the public trust doctrine. Therefore, we're not taking anything from you. You didn't have it to begin with because of the public doctrine. Public trust doctrine was there first. Okay, that's the argument. So the technique has been tried in multiple cases, and this is really ramped up over the past 4 or 5 years. Multiple cases across the country, some big cases in California, a prominent case in Nevada. I'll show you a prominent case in Iowa last year. I'll talk about that one in just a moment. To get courts to decide allegations of harm and restrict usage of private property based on global warming or climate change. There's this existential threat that is out there. That's always what they say. Well, there's an emergency. That's your code word. What did you hear today in the news? President, well, there's an emergency. Global warming is an emergency. I have to do an executive order. What are they doing? Not going through Congress, not going through the courts. They're not waiting. They're just doing it. Okay, well, we're protecting the public at large. Well, no, you're not. You're taking property rights without paying for it. That's what you're doing. That's what this is. Okay? Courts have largely rejected this. No. Based on a lack of standing. You can't do these things just because it makes you feel bad. Or it makes you feel good if you're protecting. No. You can't file a lawsuit based on your personal feelings. That's why the courts have said, no, you don't have standing. You don't have real injury, in fact, that the courts need to address, because they'll say this is a political question. If it's a political question, Congress has to answer. The state legislature has to answer. Not the courts. Courts stay out of it, largely what they have done. And so the courts have largely rejected the cases either because there's no standing to bring the case, or because the Congress didn't delegate the right of an administrative agency to deal with this particular issue. And I'll get to that Supreme Court opinion in just a moment. And the courts will say, it's a political question. We don't deal with political questions. That belongs to the politicians, the elected representatives, not some unelected bureaucracy. Courts will say, no. And so largely the courts to date have resisted the expansion of the public trust. That's it. Now, it's not to say they've done that everywhere, but largely the courts have said no. And many of these cases at the state level, they look back to state law and say, well, the legislature here has said that we have a narrow, tailored public trust doctrine, and until the legislature expands it, we're not going to do it. That's a key. That's the key in the Iowa case. So this is a quote in one of my articles on the blog. It said, the notion that vested property rights can be usurped by an expanded application of the public trust doctrine makes it easier for regulation of property rights to occur without any concern that a non-physical taking of the property has occurred that would require the private property owner to be compensated. That's what they're trying to do. Get around that requirement under the Constitution, trying to get around the constitutional protection of private property by the public trust doctrine, by saying, well, what we took was a right that you never had to begin with. It's pretty radical. That's the argument. Be aware that is being argued in a number of cases. Pretty prominent law firms are making those arguments. And they may be saying, well, in terms of its application, it might be the Endangered Species Act. We have to have minimum stream flows in a river under the public trust doctrine. There may be limitations on irrigation water. This was a Nevada case that my colleague at the law school was in, arguing as an amicus brief that under the public trust doctrine, farmers and ranchers in Nevada should be subjected to strict limitations on the amount of irrigation water. Well, no, the court rejected that. They said, no, that's up to the legislature. It's water law policy to do that, not the court. But that's how they try to do this. If the doctrine is expanded, it would require the state and federal governments to take action to preserve public rights. And if they fail to do so, the legal system would be used to force action. And that's been a tactic. Can't get legislation through. This is why the Supreme Court nominees for the last 30 years since Robert Bork have become so politicized. Because you have one side of the aisle that wants to do legislation through the courts. And so now every judge becomes politicized, and it just becomes horrible. But that's what they're trying to do. You hear this talk about, well, we need to expand the Supreme Court. Besides, well, why? Because it can't get done through the normal process of getting a bill through the Congress. So we're going to politicize the court and pack the court. That's what that discussion is all about. It's all kind of the same thing. The court becomes then something of a super legislature, a court packing technique that's off the radar, out of the public, and not subject to election. So expanding the doctrine would apply to farmers and ranchers in numerous areas. What about endangered species on private land? Well, we need the species out there for the public, therefore you can't engage in certain farming activities that would harm the habitat of that species. Now, they go through the Congress under the Endangered Species Act and the regulatory agency to promulgate a rule under the Administrative Procedures Act, put it up for a hearing, take comments, and follow the process. No. Just say public trust doctrine and run it through the courts and see if you get a court judgment. So they're changing the process here. What about vested property rights for crop irrigation, livestock water? The bypassing of the legislative process, again, their argument is we didn't take anything because you didn't have a right you took. Government, we're just getting an easement for the protection of certain designated natural resources that are deemed to be in the public interest. We're not actually taking property. Well, yeah, you're getting an easement, but by virtue of getting the easement, I'm restricted in what I can do on my property. So, yeah, it's 6 of one, half dozen of the other. And also, the expansion of the doctrine would decrease an incentive of landowners to invest in and improve natural resources. Well, one, why would I want to buy land that's subject to all these types of restrictions? I can't do anything on it. I can't profit as much from it as I could. Some of that value is taken from it. And I would, if I have it, I would invest resources to improve it if I'm not going to be able to recover that theory. Recent cases, this is the Nevada case 2 years ago. This is a water rights case. The court said the public trust doctrine had already been implemented in Nevada by virtue of their water law, the prior appropriation system. But we're not going to expand it beyond that because that was the public trust doctrine, the state's water law. And the legislature, and this was key, had expressly prevented the reallocation of water rights that had not otherwise been abandoned or forfeited to the state water law. So, no, we dealt with that through water policy. If you want to change the rule, you've got to go back to the state legislature and have them change the water law. That's the way the process is. Not by some court changing water law. This is a big case last year out of Iowa. I don't know if you followed this. This has gone on in Iowa for the last 10 years. There have been a group of activists that have tried to put more limitations on farmers in Iowa in the Raccoon River Valley Basin. From northwest Iowa, the Raccoon River goes to southeast Iowa. It is the water source for Des Moines. So it's got a big urban area on it that it supplies the water for. And there's a waterworks company in Des Moines that water comes down the Raccoon and they clean it up. And they tried to say, well, under the public trust doctrine, we need to have more limitations on farming practices so that there's less nitrogen and phosphorus that's getting into the Raccoon River, because they couldn't get it through the legislature or the state DNR. No, we have appropriate restrictions. They're following the guidelines from the land grant university and putting in all types of practices and suggestions for farmers. The legislature said, we go any further than that, then we're taking private property rights. You can't do that. And so here come the activist group and say, well, under the public trust doctrine, we need to have lower levels of nitrates and phosphorus in the Raccoon River. And so it ends up in court. It eventually gets to the Iowa Supreme Court, and the court said, no, we're not going to expand the public trust doctrine. You don't have standing. It's a legislative matter. If you don't like the current rules, lobby your representatives and get a law passed to change it. That's the way the system is supposed to be. And it did. But there are always these attempts. This is what you have to watch. It will continue. They're not going to go away. These groups that want to expand the doctrine are not going to stop. But you need to be aware of where the battle is. This is the battle that's not on the front page. This is kind of the nitty-gritty tough stuff that you're not hearing about. Is there anybody here that have heard the public trust doctrine? Just a couple. Yeah. But this is the technical legal stuff that's going on behind the scenes. All right. Now let's go to the other item for this evening on my part. Major questions, Doctor. There were 3 monumental U.S. Supreme Court opinions right near the end of the term. Of course, everybody knows the abortion decision, the Dobbs decision, and that's monumental, not on the abortion issue. I mean, it could have been any issue. But the fact that the court said, we don't have any business in this because the Constitution is silent on this issue, that's a state issue. How often have you seen a Supreme Court give up power? That's why it's monumental. And it has absolutely nothing to do with abortion. That just happened to be the issue that generated the case. But for them to say, no, if it's not enumerated in the Constitution, it goes to the state. Okay, fine. And it's not for a court where you have unlimited lifetime tenure on the court to make a decision, where it can come down to one person making the difference. They're not subject to being voted out of office. No, kick it to the states. Beautiful. That's the way the Constitution is supposed to work. Okay. Just happens to be a high-profile issue, very high-profile issue that it just gets confused by people and a lot of misinformation out of it. But that's what it's at. Then you have the gun case, the Second Amendment case. That was a good from property rights case. Then you had, on the last day of the session, and I was speaking in Missouri, in Columbia, Missouri, I had my phone on the podium, and I get notices that a Supreme Court making a decision. I saw this pop up. Good. And I went to the break, showed my student that. Need to pull up the Supreme Court's website, read that case. And I wrote an article on it, and I'll summarize the article here for you. But this is the major questions doctrine that's been rolling around about 30 years, since early 1990s. And there's actually 2 doctrines that are out there. I wish they would have selected the non-delegation doctrine, but they did not. They went with the major questions doctrine. Good enough. And I'll explain what that is. A lot of governmental regulation of economic activity is done through administrative. You farmer, you ranch, you know that. You deal with USDA, you deal with federal crop insurance, FDIC, RMA, you deal with FSA, all of these agencies, NRCS, you got all these rules. So there's a lot of regulation of agricultural activity. Some of you that have farmed for decades think back how it was prior to 1970. Not nearly as regulated as now. That's not coming from a law, so to speak. You're not dealing with that issue. You're dealing with an administrative agency that is construing in many instances, a vague law. Maybe it's a wetlands type issue. Whatever the case may be, there are a lot of them. Ag activities are heavily regulated. And much of administrative law involves the administrative agency acting as judge and jury. They cite you for some type of violation. Oh, if you want to challenge this, you appeal to us. And then we'll decide if we were wrong. Well, wait a minute, it's the same people that made the decision that you have to go back and appeal. Well, if you lose that one at the county level, then where do you go? You go to the state level, same agency. Then you go to the federal level, same agency. But you got to do that, and they just exhaust all those administrative remedies before you can ever get to a court. And by that time, they may have nickel and dimed you so far that you don't have money left to do that. And they understand it. They know that. I was involved in a case, and my wife will suffice to support this. 18 years. 18 years in a battle with USDA and NRCS. One in the 8th Circuit was a wetlands case out of Nebraska. One in the 8th Circuit, agency was told, you're wrong, we got a nice rule, remanded back to the agency to go draw a new grade line on this drainage ditch up in the Sandhills, Polk County, Nebraska. So we have the field hearing, and guess what the state does when they come out and draw a grade line? They drew an uphill grade line and said that complied with the court order. Now, wait a minute. Most of, if you have grandkids, you could probably ask a 6-year-old, does water drain uphill? No. So back into court we went. I was part of filing 3 contempt actions against the USDA secretary for failing to comply with the federal court order. 18 years this went on. Now, how much did I charge for this? How much did I charge, Gene?
Got a couple dozen eggs.
I got a couple dozen eggs, yeah. That's about right, yeah. I stayed in Dorothy's bunkhouse one night, and I don't know what was crawling around on me that night. But if you don't have lawyers that do that, they would have been lost. And I got storage stuff, unbelievable stuff. 18 years of that. That's all regulation. It's all regulation dealing with an agency. Congress enacts enabling legislation, all this stuff. It might be a Clean Air Act. It might be the Swamp Buster Law. It might be the Clean Water Act. That's the enabling legislation. But then leaves the agency, EPA, Corps of Engineers, USDA, to implement and administer the particular program. Okay. Well, the agencies have to follow, or they're supposed to follow, the Administrative Procedures Act. What that is, well, when they come up with a rule, they propose the rule, they publish the rule, they set it for a hearing, they put a notice out. You want to comment on this, you can comment on this, we'll set it for a hearing in Washington, D.C., such and such time before we finalize the rec. That's the process they're supposed to go through. Now, the number one agency that violates that rule all the time is the USDA. They very rarely pay any attention to the Administrative Procedures Act, and they've got what's known as the Payment Limitations Manual. If you're into the payment limitations, they're in the 6th edition of that now, and very rarely, when they change a rule, do they ever go through the APA. They just change their little handbook, post it on the website. You're supposed to know this stuff. You're supposed to just keep up. They just blow off the APA all the time. When the agencies do this stuff, from a legal standpoint, they have a very low standard of review. In other words, this is not strictly scrutinized by the courts. The question only is, did the agency act rationally and within their statutory authority? In other words, if they weren't totally off the wall, then their rule is fine. So it's an arbitrary and capricious standard. The rule has to be arbitrary and capricious and have no relation whatsoever to the act of Congress that they're trying to write a rule in. Very low threshold. And you'll see very few instances where a court will wipe out an agency rule under that standard. But that low deference does not apply for agency opinion letters, policy statements, agency manuals, enforcement actions. That the courts are going to say, we're not going to give you deference on that stuff. When you do a formalized rule, they'll probably uphold that. Now, this Supreme Court opinion, West Virginia and a bunch of other states filed a lawsuit against the EPA. And this goes back to the Clean Power Plan that was enacted under President Obama. I'll get to that in just a moment. But the major questions doctrine, which has been out there for about 30 years, says that if an administrative agency is setting national policy by regulation, the arbitrary and capricious review standard by the court does not apply. That's really low threshold. That's a low hurdle. Easy for the agency to get over that hurdle. So, now we're into high hurdles. Some of you may have ran high hurdles in high school. Now we're at high hurdles. It's tough to get over it. We're not going to give you deference. We're not just going to give you a pass. There has to be a clear statutory authority from Congress given to you to do national policy by regulation. Because national policy is to be done by the Congress, what the court is saying, not by an administrative agency. This doctrine has been used in cases involving the FCC, the FDA, the IRS, the CDC, and OSHA in the last 30 years. This is what was before the U.S. Supreme Court in that opinion that came down on June 3rd. National policy decisions are the domain of the Congress. Here's the case. SCOTUS, the Supreme Court, was asked to review the EPA's authority to regulate greenhouse gas emissions from existing power plants under the Clean Air Act. What this dates back to is in 2008, then candidate Obama made a rather famous statement, and you'll remember it when I paraphrase it here. He said, if I'm elected, I'm going to make it so expensive that coal-fired electrical plants will go out of business. And then I'm going to bankrupt them. That was his quote. Couldn't get it through the Congress. So what did he come up with? The Clean Power Plan. That agency, here's what I want, put them out of business and shift the energy generation in this country into renewables, put that in quotes, wind and solar. Okay? So they did. The Clean Power Plan regulated CO2 emissions. Now, what is carbon dioxide? Let's just think of that for a moment. Is that pollutant? There's a whole bunch of carbon dioxide coming out right here. You're picking up a whole bunch.
That's what makes plants grow.
Yeah, it is.
Yeah.
But they called it carbon, so it sounded black.
That's right. That's right. Yeah. So the Clean Power Plan regulated CO2 emissions from coal and natural gas power plants. The EPA said we can do this, and it was Section 111 of the Clean Air Act. And it said that gives us the power to shift energy generation at the plants to renewable energy sources such as wind and solar. And they admitted in their commentary, yeah, there are no existing power plants, coal-fired or natural gas-fired power plants that comply with this. They'll go out of business. It'll cost tens of thousands of jobs. It'll cost the economy billions of dollars. The EPA said that. But they said, we can do it. So we're carrying out the policy that the president wanted, not going through the Congress, just coming up with this rule. That got challenged, and the Supreme Court knocked it out in 2016. Said, no, you've overstepped your boundaries. Then the administration changed, and the people inside the agencies changed. There are some lifetime bureaucrats, but basically when you have a change of administration, a lot of the underlings are flushed out. And so that rule was repealed and was replaced with the rule under the Trump administration known as the Affordable Clean Energy Rule, which that rule said the only thing we can do at the EPA is we can tell power plants, we can guide them with respect to equipment upgrades, but we can give them guidance as to how to operate more efficiently, but we don't have the authority to change the manner of energy generation. Well, they got sued by the activists saying, well, you're not going far enough. You need to do all this stuff. So it ends up before the U.S. Supreme Court that vacated the Trump rule and resurrected the Obama rule. Now, you got to pay attention to judges here. How many of you remember President Trump getting criticized greatly by the mainstream media when he said, well, those were Obama judges? Remember that? Well, what type of judges were on the circuit that did this? Who appointed them? Wow, all three of them. Okay. Yeah, and courts have become politicized. So what Trump said was right. Now it's sad that it was right. It's right. And so then this tees it up for the U.S. Supreme Court. This goes on appeal, and the Supreme Court said, no, this is a major question that is involved. They invoked the major questions doctrine and said, you don't have the authority when a national issue is at stake to regulate that. You can do equipment upgrades, you can regulate efficiency of existing plants, but you can't change the nature of energy generation without that going through the Congress. And so that's what the court said. And again, look what the court did. In the abortion case, they returned power to the states. In this case, they returned power to the Congress. In both instances, they're returning power to people that are subject to election. So they return the power in both instances to the people, which is the way the Constitution is supposed to work. That's what those two cases are all about. No matter what you read in the press, it gets all garbled up. That's as simple as, that's really what it is. And Justice Thomas, in his concurrence in the EPA case, said, you know, while we're at it, this court has screwed up a whole bunch of stuff over the past 50 years. We need to revisit all of that. Oh, man, that set the other side's hair on fire. That's what he was talking about. He said, well, this court has gotten itself into a whole bunch of stuff it should have never gotten into. While we're at it, let's go look at all this other stuff. Okay. And that's what happened in Congress, I think it was today, where the House voted to override DOMA. Did you see that? The Defense of Marriage Act. Although the Supreme Court invalidated that in 2013, the House voted to take it off the books and basically deny any state the right to set their own marriage law by statute. Now, it's not going to get, I can't imagine the Senate, but they're so excised about what Justice Thomas said that they're just, oh, we can't do this through the courts, but we have to do it through the courts. And that's why they're saying on this climate change executive order, well, we're just going to forget what the Supreme Court said. The Supreme Court said this is unconstitutional. Well, we'll just do it, and they're just going to have to keep ruling. That's what's going on. That's the fight that's going on in the courts. The courts are being used in that manner. So those are the two big developments recently. And I'll leave you with that. I didn't want to go much longer than 45 minutes. Try to keep it to that. And it's warm in here, too. I will feel, if you have any questions, I'll pause for a moment. There's my contact information. Did that make any sense?
Yes.
Yeah.
God bless you for having those farmers.
Thank you.
Fine.
Thank you. I know my wife was so frustrated with that.
Well, God bless her too.
Yes, God bless.
She would pick up the phone at the house because Dorothy would call the house. Oh, it's Dorothy again. Okay. Yeah.
Out in the 30-mile wide area, where is that? Through right here, or where does the area go? Or south, or where we're supposed to go, or
Oh, that's not the issue I'm talking about here. April probably knows, or Angel probably knows that.
oh, okay.
Is that everything?
I would tell you one more thing, and this just happened yesterday. On my 2-minute radio show, do you recognize the intro music and the music that takes it out? What's that? What is that music? What's that sound? It's John Mellencamp's Small Town. Okay. Let me tell you a real quick story. When I had initially cut 4 demo tapes in a studio in Nashville about 3 years ago for this idea. and was pitching it to sponsors, and then COVID hit. And so everybody just kind of got to wait this through. We're not ready to increase our advertising budget. So, but you got to have, I got to get this paid for somehow. Just don't get on the radio. Got it paid for, sponsorships and so forth. Well, we get to February of last year, and it was a bank that's nationwide in Nebraska that said, "Okay, we're ready to go. We'll get this launched." So that allowed me to have enough money to pay myself, hire a production engineer in studio in Nashville, and a marketing specialist in Missouri to be able to contact the station. Well, then I wanted some sound. I wanted some sound on the front end and the back end, really, to make this a nice package. And what came to my mind was the words of Small Town. If you listen to those words, and this is what I try to convey to my students, you don't have to go off the big city to practice law. In fact, you're really needed in rural areas. And you need to be specifically trained on issues that farmers and ranchers deal with, because you just can't park any attorney out here and expect to know your issues. You got to get them specifically trained. So that's what we're doing at law school and rural law school. And in fact, my colleague that's going to teach ethics with me for an hour tomorrow is doing site visits today and tomorrow out there. We have a firm here in town that has one of our students on an internship funded by the Hanson County. We put about 20 students every summer out in the Hanson County, 26 county area, at no cost to those firms. And then many of them are staying in those firms after graduation. So it's a really good program. There's a lot of attorneys that are getting ready to retire. There's some areas that don't have attorneys. We're trying to really fill that void. And so that the lyrics to that song, I'm from a small town, I'll probably die in a small town. You know the words to it. That's what I wanted. But then I had a problem. I got to get a license to do that. I got to get the melon. How am I going to do that? Well, I have a friend that farms in eastern Kansas. He's been involved in Farm Aid for a number of years, so I just called him, and he comes occasionally and works on my tractor. So I called him and said, "Roger, what do you want John Mellencamp?" I explained to him that's interest. I said, "Can you get me the melon?" "No, but I can get you somebody, or I get you to manage. That's good enough." And so later that day, I'm talking with the lady that books talent for Farm Aid, who knows Mellencamp's manager in New York City. And by the end of the day, I had information to her that she passed to John's manager in the Bronx in New York City. Okay? And I had to get the manager to approve. Well, we'd already selected May 3rd as the launch date. And here we are coming perilously close. We're in mid-April, and I hadn't heard it. And then I get an email out of the blue from John's manager, and it was the total, "Who are you, out in Kansas," blow-off email. That sound has never been used by anybody. John does not allow Hollywood to use it. He doesn't allow corporations to use it. Nobody uses it. Have a nice life. So I called my marketing guy in Missouri, and I said, "Mark, here's what I got. I'm going to ask for an expedited appeal." He said, "Oh, you lawyers." If I get this to John, I'm convinced he'll like it. I got to get past this guy in New York City. I got to get it to John. And so I sent a reply to him. I said, "Thanks, but I don't really think you understand what I'm talking about here." Well, long story short, he calls me to personally blow me off on the phone in a thick New York accent. And he is not happy. And I said, "Give me 2 minutes." He said, "Randy, just give me 2 minutes." 2 minutes turned into 20. And he said, "You know, the problem I had with this is I listened to the first demo tape, and I didn't listen to the others. You know what the topic on the demo tape was that this guy in New York City listened to? Shooting trespassing dogs." And he had absolutely no understanding of why that was relevant to farmers and ranchers. And I said, "Randy, it is. It really is. We're not." He said, "Well, we don't want to be associated with killing dogs." It's not killing dogs, just to kill dogs. So I said, would you listen to the other ones? And I said, yeah, right. Tell me some more about it. So that opened the door. And he finally said, all right, I am flying this weekend to Indiana. I'm going to be with John all weekend long. We got business to do. I'll share it with him. And the next, that was on a Friday. On Tuesday, he called me back. And I was his best friend in the world. The whole thing had changed 180 degrees. John loved it. And yes, and just today, I signed the renewal license for another year. So I have to go back to Sony, which goes checks with John. And so he's done me well. And he's a big fan of agriculture. He has for years. It's one of the fastest farming Willie Nelson. So that's just kind of the backstory. So if you hear it, think of Mellencamp. Mellencamp's he's a friend of farmers. Thank you very much. And thanks for the invite.
I saw that Tatum snuck in during the presentation. Thank you. And was there anything on 30 by 30 that I didn't address earlier? Was there any questions? I think you were asking me about the territory. Are you asking me about the territory of the National Heritage Area?
Well, where's the 30-mile wide area concerning that's coming through here?
30 by 30 is 30% of the United States in conservation.
Well, I mean, coming through this area or whatever. And where do we stand? We're somewhat
Coming-
west, somewhat east.
All of it, honestly. I haven't seen a county that hasn't been afflicted in some way, shape, or form in the state of Kansas. Legislatively, White House, we were talking about executive orders. If you put climate change in the search engine on the White House's page, you get an executive order almost every day that Biden is in office that is referencing climate change or climate justice in some way. I mean, we all know about the 30 by 31. There are several since then. When we were at the hearing in Topeka on December 9th, they came in and announced that there is another one called Carbon Free by 2050. So it's the whole entire idea is that we are abusing the land and it needs to be underneath government control, underneath regulation. Let's turn it all into a park. Oh, and it's pitched and sold mostly to people in the cities. You need more hunting land and you need more places to fish. And because if they drive out into the country and they see a cornfield, that must be true. That's where it's getting sold mostly to. We all know better. We know that wildlife grows better on that farmland than it ever does on public land. We know that. The people in the city do not. They just know that their favorite fishing spot has been found out about, so they need a new one. That's all they know. Oh, I actually had a guy tell me, they said, deer hunting is agriculture. Well, yes, sir, it is. But please tell me, how many trips do you need to take out into the woods to fill your freezer for 365 days? You got to make them think. It's kind of culturally popular to hate farmers nowadays. So to answer your question, 30%, it's who leaves first. And what we're looking and what we're seeing is that those with CRP, a lot of these meetings that we did, people afterwards would come up and tell us and show us their contracts. So we're telling people, if you're doing CRP, pay attention to those contracts. Especially in the north central region, a lot of them do not have end dates on them. We are told that if you slide that back across the table and demand an end date or demand what you want, that you will get it, and nobody has been turned away yet. That's one thing to look. We notice that there's a big, huge push for conservation easements, and that is going in the Flint Hills under the legacy program there. They want all 100% of the Flint Hills and conservation easements. You'll notice that along rivers, conservation easements is very, very heavy, and along already federal ground, conservation easements is really, really heavy. How that'll go, Tallgrass National Prairie in Chase County is a really good example. Tallgrass National Prairie is owned primarily by Nature Conservancy. More than 10,000 acres is owned by Nature Conservancy. 30-some acres is owned by the National Park Service, yet it's all run by the National Park Service. The National Park Service, to me, is a purchasing agent. The Nature Conservancy is a purchasing agent for the National Park Service. The sick part about that is they often get grants federal grants from the National Park Service to buy land to either donate or sell back to the National Park Service. For regulations is another way. They come in with very, very heavy regulations and people start moving out because they can't grow. They can't make any money. They don't even know why they're moving out other than they just can't make a living anymore. They don't understand that their zoning has gotten that strict. Sometimes they go in for harassing. And while you're getting harassed for that permit violation, here comes the Nature Conservancy or somebody else knocking on your door saying, hey, we can be the go-between. All you got to do is tell us your personal property rights. And most people don't realize they take advantage. I've heard so many stories of people getting a knock on the door within 6 months of their spouse passing. This is common. Your kids will move back, I promise, they'll tell you. All we have to do is preserve it, and the money that we give you for that preservation will pay your taxes until the kids move back. When you do that, you become tenants on your own land. You might as well just sell the property, make a lot more money, and go somewhere else. Make them purchase that access rather than become landlords of it. The last USDA email that I received bragged about a wilderness area in western Kansas, western Nebraska, and eastern Colorado. In it, they talked about the ELP program that's been going on in Fort Riley an awful long time. They're going to release ELP. I'm hearing a lot of rumors in the nature groups and the rail trail groups of releasing wolves in Kansas, because that's what we all need, right? It's Buffalo Common, if y'all remember Buffalo Common. When we were here last year, we would tell people that the NHAs had nothing to do with 30 by 30. We were wrong. Having done this for a year now, I now know that 30 by 30 is a very old scheme. It's a very old program. It's just been confessed to for the first time by an administration. Totally adopted and championed. Really, the only difference. So, any other questions before I introduce Tatum? All right. Tatum is my hero. I need Tatum in this legislative. I need her. Nobody else has offered to write any legislation. I had a couple people say that they will or they might, and they got nowhere. Thank you. I need her. She's the only one brave enough to stand up against the lobbyists that are making a buku amount of money on conservation easements and federal handouts for the 30 by 30 program. Every day they are hitting our legislatures telling us that I'm crazy, I'm a liar, we never really tried to ban barbed wire fences, it didn't really happen, don't listen to that crazy lady. Tatum really is the only one that really happened. So without her in the legislature, I don't think that we're going to get anywhere on the land issue. So I came out here, one, to update you, and two, to introduce you to Tatum. I think most of you already know. So I'm going to turn it over to Tatum. Thank you.
Well, after listening to Roger, government sucks. That's the first part of the speech. Government sucks and it's super hot. The other, ma'am.
Put it down a little bit.
Oh, awesome. Thank you.
Remember to put it back up.
Okay. Well, since I'm such a fiscal conservative, I sure remember to do so.
They'll say, oh, they shouldn't.
Okay. So, interesting story about Roger. I don't know if you had known Roger before, but I had connected Angel and Roger because Roger and I had met when I worked for a cattle association for 5 years, and he would come and do programs for me with this cattle association. And my first year up in Topeka, I actually lived with P&G. So they're good friends of mine, and I'm very thankful for Roger because they say that a sign of a good leader is to surround yourself with people smarter than you are. So I'm really good. I'm surrounded, and I'm thankful for that because I call on Roger a lot and say, okay, what do I do with this? What about this? And so he's been a great supporter and a great advocate, and he just back there, he goes, well, how you doing? I'm like, boy, howdy, I'm ready for August 2nd to be here. So let me tell you a little bit about who I am and about how I got here and why I'm standing here in Waukene. First of all, I'm so thankful for Angel, and she's one of my heroes because, well, let me take a step back. So I'm from Nest City, and my family's been ranching there 137 years. So we've been there for a hot minute, punching cows and farming. And my papa he is my ultimate hero. And he was put in a nursing home. And then COVID happened. And they wouldn't let me see him. And I was like, boy, howdy, this fella has gone to bat for me my whole life. You think that I'm not going to go die on that hill to get him some rights while he is at the end of his? I mean, absolutely. And my prayer for y'all is that you have invested enough in your kids and grandkids that they will absolutely go balls to the wall, whatever it takes, we're going to defend our constitutional liberties. Because that's where we're at, you all. We are losing our country. Further and faster than we ever have before, they're coming after our rights. And when COVID happened, I'm real embarrassed to tell you this. I did not even know the name of my state representative because I was working at the federal level on cattle issues, and I was focusing on the profitability of making sure we were keeping our ranches and our small farm and feedlots. And so I just thought, well, he's a Republican. He's got it taken care of, right? And when I reached out to him, I did not realize he had gotten really sick and ended up passing away. And so it was one of those Esther moments. Y'all ever have one of those in your life? Some of you have been on the earth a little bit longer than I have. I know the Lord, at some point in your life, you've been like, okay, I guess I'm going to have to step up and have courage. And that's what happened. He passed away, and I ran for his office in 2 special elections, and I won both of them. And so I've been in Topeka the last 2 years. And I'm telling you what, I went to Topeka, and I thought, well, praise the Lord. We're the Republican super majority. We have the House and the Senate. So these are going to be my friends. They're going to help me. They're going to help want to get some freedom to these old folks. You know, I told the Attorney General's office when I was a girl without a title, when I was just a granddaughter, just a mere citizen. And I said, hey, are y'all going to file a lawsuit against the federal government for infringing on the rights of these elderly that have no voice? Because their right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness has been stripped away. And the little gal said to me, well, ma'am, we represent the government, not the people. And I've told that story a few times around the state because the last 2 years, and other people have said the same. That's not just my isolated story. That was the position of our Attorney General. And I was just desperate. And when you're desperate enough, you'll fight like the Dickens. And so I went to Topeka, and I thought, well, these folks are going to help me. They're going to be on my side, and we are going to stand up for the constitutional liberties of Kansas. Because apparently everybody lost their mind when COVID happened. And who knew that the Constitution was suspended during the pandemic, the plandemic, as I like to call it. Did you know that? Did you know that it's okay to just suspend the Constitution during the pandemic? That's crap. That's absolute crap. The Constitution is not suspended, period, ever. And so they maybe weren't so much on my side up there. They're like, well, now, Tatum, there's a certain way to do stuff here. And Larry will attest to this. Larry Powell, he was up there a long time. How long were you up there?
16 years.
Well, see, that's too long. I'm not going to be there 16 years. Sorry, Larry. Woo!
I've got experience.
Yes, you do. And so here's what they say. Tatum, you don't know how things work up here. And what has come out is what they meant was, Tatum, the lobbyists run everything. If you can get the lobbyists on your side and you can get them to write checks, then we can get legislation passed. And I'm like, where I'm from, we the people tell the government what to do, not the lobbyists. So I looked around and I started seeing these political games. And you don't come in have Facebook when you're in Topeka, but we have Facebook now. And I was like, holy smokes, if my neighbors found out what I just found out, they'd be just as mad as I am. I have to let the people know because this is real bad, the stuff that goes on up here. So I just got on Facebook and I started telling the truth. And I started posting voting records. And I started posting, here's the games, here's what's happening. Call your Speaker of the House, call your leadership, call your majority leader. The majority leader said to me the second week I was there, he came up and he goes, the system you realize that the majority leader is God, many chairs are God, you'll be better off. I said, well, sir, with all due respect, I bend my knee to one God, and that's the Lord Jesus Christ. But that's the arrogance in Topeka. And many of them say, Tim, you just need to be quiet. You just need to follow along. I'm like, let me just tell you something. My papa is in Ness County, and he has spent his entire life building that community. And if you think that I'm just going to sit here and be quiet so I can learn for the next 2 years, I may not be coming back. And I know that the Lord has put me here for such a time as this. So I kept, because, government should be transparent. Anybody agree? Hello, right? So I kept putting stuff on Facebook. And I kept trying to go to the people. Anybody on Facebook? Follow me on Facebook? Because I know some of you I've met on Facebook because of Facebook. Well, the Speaker of the House called me in just this last year. He goes, Tatum, nobody has taken the business of the Capitol outside the Capitol like you have. And I said, well, Speaker Reitman, people want transparent government. See, in Topeka, they've forgotten that we, the people, tell them what to do. They're not kingmakers. They're not kingmakers. So here's what ends up happening. What ends up happening is I just kept fighting. And we had some medical health freedom bills. Y'all remember when one of Biden's executive orders was the vaccine mandate? Remember that? All these people were going to lose their jobs. So because there's very few legislators that get on social media and make themselves available to talk to the people. Shoot fire, I'm one of the people. Like, well, this is not about me. This is about you all. This is about us, right? And so I needed your help. So that's why I was so transparent, because I was like, we have to change something up here. Well, there was when those mandates started coming down the pipe, I started getting messages from people all over the state. Tatum, what are you going to do? What are we going to do? Because if you remember, people are going to lose their jobs in the fall, right? Well, session starts January to May, okay? So it was going to happen before we were back in session. What are we going to do? So I start texting the leadership. I'm trying to follow the rules sometimes, Larry. I'm texting the leadership. Hey, what are we going to do? People are about to lose their jobs. Tatum, you just need to pre-file some legislation, and we'll deal with it in January. Well, it made me mad. I'm like, people don't have till January, Majority Leader Hawkins. People are about to lose their jobs now. Well, he said, well, we're going to send a letter to President Biden, and we're going to tell him that the legislature is not happy, and we do not think, I don't even know what it was. It was so stupid, I stopped listening. I was like, well, I bet he's going to be super nervous about that. I bet President Biden is just going to hop to and go, well, dadgum, we just got to stop the ship. The Kansas legislature has written a letter. So, I mean, I know, right? This is just silly. So I said, okay, I'll sign your letter, but you're not going to run my signature to make you feel good that we're really doing something. We need to have a special session, and we need to pass a law to prevent mandates in the state of Kansas. Because, and I have some of these constitutions in my briefcase, do you all know that the 10th Amendment says that states are right? Let's look at Colorado and their marijuana laws. Let's look at Oklahoma and their marijuana laws. If a state has courage and the will, they can pass a law to protect people, right? I said, we need to pass a law to protect our people from these unconstitutional federal mandates. Oh, Tatum, we can't get that done. no, we don't have the courage, Mr. Leader, to get that done. That's what he really meant to say. Besides, it might have made the hospital association mad. They write big checks. He didn't say that part, but that's the implied, hey, Tatum, this is how things work. Right? Well, that made me mad because he ended up leaving me off the letter after I told him 3 times to put on the letter. That might be the next mailer that y'all get. Wouldn't sign the white letter. No, I told him I'd sign the letter, but we needed to have some action to actually do something to protect folks, right? I'm so tired of people in government spewing a bunch of political talking points, but then go into Topeka or DC and they don't do anything to actually, like, do your job. Do your job. We don't do our job. We don't need. They don't do their job. They still get reelected, right? Because the lobbyists pay for their mailers. Tell you how conservative they are. Makes me so fucking mad. Anyway, so here's what I did. I started to pray because Holy Spirit's my best friend, and it's the only way I survived Topeka the last 2 years. So I said, okay, Lord, I said, I need some strategy. I don't know what to do. People are about to lose their jobs. They're calling me because there's a remnant of legislators in the Kansas House and Senate that are patriots. And I'll get to that in just a minute. There's a remnant of us, this small group. And I knew the Lord could use that because the Lord do things on the earth. For sure. A remnant, right? I mean, shoot fire and spread the gospel with 12. He can use a few politicians if he wants to, okay? And so I said, okay, well, there's 2 ways that we can get back to a special session to pass a law or to pass a bill to protect people. The first way is the governor can call us back. Well, liberal lockdown Laura was not going to call us back. We knew that. The other way is that 2/3 of the legislature petitions the governor, then by statute, she has to call us back. Okay? Never been done in history. Well, that's all right, because the Lord put me here for such a time as this. Let's write a letter. Let's send it to our colleagues, and let's say, hey, y'all, we need to petition the governor and get that. This is unprecedented, right? History had shown that they had called a special session because of a grasshopper infestation before in the state of Kansas. Surely, if we're about to lose half our workforce, we can call a special session. I mean, this is serious, right? So I wrote a letter along with 4 of my friends, 3 senators and 2 representatives. And the letter basically was said, hey, we're about to lose our workforce and people are hurting and we have to help them. And the people are demanding, the people are demanding that their legislature go back and pass a law to protect them. So we sent that out to our colleagues, and within hours, the Speaker of the House sends out an email. Oh, there's a group trying to divide us, and we don't want you to sign the petition because it's going to cost too much money. It was $65,000 a day, by the way. And I'm thinking, now, I'm cuter than I am smart with math. That's what I tell my husband when he's like, hey, that's mental math. I'm like, I can't be cute and good at mental math, okay? So mental math is not my deal. However, I'm going to be honest with y'all, $65,000 a day seems like a drop in the bucket. If we're about to lose all these nurses in Western Kansas and Wichita and Kansas City, I mean, we're already understaffed at all these facilities, nursing homes. I mean, this would have smoked our economy. Totally an excuse. And so, out of 165 representatives and senators, do you know how many signed that petition? Send it to the governor to say, hey, the people want a special session. We're going to go work for our constituents. 19 out of 165 legislators signed that petition to say, we don't care what party leadership says. We care what our people say. Now that should be we'll take questions at the end, sir. That should be very shocking. Honestly, it should come as a government to all of us. Because here's what the Lord has spoken to my heart the last 2 years. Government is a symbiotic relationship between we the people and our elected officials, right? They have a job, but we the people have a job. And I'm the first one to tell you that I didn't write a campaign check or lock a door for 10 years. I would not be the people doing my job. He was a Republican, praise the Lord. He must align with my value set. I moved on with my life. I didn't fact check one vote he made, and I'm not picking on him. I'm talking about any of them. I didn't fact check any of their votes. They're Republicans, right? Y'all, they've been selling us down the river. We have a whole lot of rhinos in the state of Kansas, and that's what that 19 number should tell you. When you get these mailers and they talk about how conservative they are, and I'm not just talking about in this race with Mr. Minnick. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about all the races. I'm talking about your attorney general race. I'm talking about all of them. The litmus test that people say all the time, Tatum, is my rep a rhino? Is my senator a rhino? Were they one of the 19? Because it took a lot of courage. You know why? Because in Topeka, and Larry can vouch for me, there's so many games that then they punish you if you step out of line, right? Which is why I'm standing here to run to be your District 118 state representative, because I'm the current state representative for 117. Want to know how I got here? Because I wouldn't shut up and talking about fighting for them. And they were like, shoot fire, how do we get rid of this gal? I'm pretty sure they just thought, we should just let her see it. At this point, they're probably just like, man, we just should have let her go into the nursing home. You all, I'm so thankful for the last 2 years, because we normal people are going to have to step up, and we're going to have to fight to take our country back. And I'll be real honest with you, very candid with you, and I say this as lovingly as possible. It is not my job to fight for your liberty. It wasn't Larry's job. Liberty doesn't come from a legislator, you all. Liberty is innately put in there by God. That's where liberty comes from. What is the scripture that says, what the Spirit of the Lord is, there is liberty, there's freedom. It is not up to a legislator to legislate or negotiate away your freedom. And what's going to happen, in my opinion, is this whole thing with COVID and the federal government, they're coming after us in all the ways. They're coming after our food supply. They're coming after our land. You know, let's look at history. Bolshevik Russia in the 1920s. They control the people. Food supply, right? So we're going to have to stay very, very vigilant. And I'm so thankful that Angel, she's a hero of mine, because I had just been elected, and I get this call from this gal, and actually a fella who background cabs for us out in Emporia. He goes, hey, I got a gal. And she ranches goats. And I'm like, oh, geez. She's a goat rancher. Here we go. I'm just kidding. And she's like, now she ranches, she farms the goats, but, and he goes, but this gal just found out that the truck banned barbed wire in the Foothills. And Holy Spirit just quickened my heart. And I knew I had to, I had to tell this woman. I didn't want to, but I knew the Lord had put me here for such a time as this to do something. And I also remember I was her. I was that desperate woman who just needed help. Nobody would help me. And I'm so thankful that the Lord connected us, because this 30 by 30, these land issues, you all, if we don't have private property rights secured, and we don't have free elections, we don't have freedom. That's the cornerstone and the foundation of who we are in this country. This is very important. I wish we'd have had 3 times the amount of people in this room, because out here, we got a lot of land. And we better let our neighbors know what's going on. Which brings me back to, I was representing District 117. And for the whole session, January to May, they said, hey, Tatum, we're not touching your district. Well, praise the Lord. I'm sure they thought I'd probably go to Facebook. That's probably why they didn't want to touch my district. Well, what ends up happening is I'm on the elections committee, and I've seen the data. And there was fraud in Kansas in our election. And I did what I felt like the people wanted, which was to know, hey, there's been fraud in our elections. The Legislative Research Department in 2018 and 2020 had put together a legislative document that said that our elections, that there were potential problems with our elections. Our own legislative department, a whole group of lawyers in the Capitol, had already started warning us in 2018. So I went public. And any of y'all know Mike Lindell, the My Pillow fella, which by the way, he endorsed me last week, praise the Lord. So Mike Lindell, he sends his election scientist to Kansas, and he is testifying in the elections committee. And the elections committee was awful to him, and I was embarrassed. So I apologized on behalf of Kansas for this man coming to help us, right? We cannot be so afraid about calling out our own party because we're afraid that, their buddy, the Secretary of State, which by the way, Mike Brown is who I'll be voting for Secretary of State. Yeah, we cannot be so afraid to call out our own party. If right is right and wrong is wrong, right? We can't play political games. We can't afford to play political games anymore. Well, the next morning, I get a phone call. They said, Tatum, did you hear what happened in the redistricting committee this morning? I said, no. They said, they took your district away. I said, well, no, they didn't. The Speaker of the House told me himself, face to face in his office, that he wasn't going to touch my district. Well, he did something. But he didn't. So, in a moment, I thought, Lord, Lord. And I heard Holy Spirit, trust me, trust me. So I'm from Leota. My family's from Leota. My dad's branch is from there. That's where we had our feedlot. My mom's family's from Nestor County. And we know a few folks right in between that 96 corridor because we have a little bit of land going through there. And I'm quite certain they thought, there's no way in 60 days this little gal is going to be able to cover the largest district in Kansas, 9 counties from 30 cities, 28 cities, something like that. But God, right? So I asked my husband, I said, well, guess what they've done? I said, do you want me to run again? Because when you're as conservative as I am, Trump's out of office and they still kick him, right? And I said, do you want me to run again? Because when I say that it's not my job to fight for your liberty, I mean that very, very loving. It's an honor to be able to do so, but it's real hard because there's a lot of personal hits. And I didn't realize, it's really a miracle you survived for 16 years, quite frankly, because when you're so conservative, they just fire at you, fire at you, fire at you. My scripture, my life scripture in this season, because the Lord has seasons in our life, is Isaiah 54:60 or 54:17. No weapon formed against me will prosper. Every tongue that rises up against me in judgment will be shown to be false. And I say that every time I get my mail. So I asked my husband, hey, babe, do you want me to run again? He said, absolutely not. If people like you don't run, we're going to lose our. And then I thought about my grandparents. And I thought about who they have built me to be. My papa passed away in August. But not before I didn't get him some freedom. You all, they put those people behind plexiglass boxes like animals, like criminals. Papas, that's not where they should go, especially if they're in love. And some have said, man, she's a radical. Standing up to the Constitution is radical. Sign me up. So I am running because liberty is worth the fight. Liberty is worth. It's worth a little bit of personal attack. Not storming the beaches of Normandy. I have to forgive myself that perspective when I just want to go slap the fire out of someone. I'm just kidding. For heaven's sake, don't put that. Well, we have edited that. Don't put that in the mailer, probably. Violence. I have to remind myself that many men and women have come before us and have done greater things than these for our liberty. I also have to be very stern when I tell you I need to stop. Because this isn't about me. Could have been you, could have been your wife, could have been kids in a hospital, in a nursing home, and maybe you even have some of those stories. Liberty is not, this fight for liberty in the state of Kansas is not about me. It's about the people taking their state tax. The reason the lobbyists are so fervently, I mean, you all, do you know how much money is being spent in this little, we represent more cattle than people, for heaven's sakes. It's because they have to shut up the voice of the people in Topeka. And they know that I'm not going to stop. I'm going to go the next 2 years and I'm going to expose all the other games they're going to play. So this is the only way that they can try to take me out. They'll redistrict me. They took one, and here's the real tragedy. Really nothing to do with me, although it did make me mad in a lot of ways. They took away a voice in West